I had just finished at university and had a couple of weeks holiday before I started my first full-time job when I was invited by my aunt and uncle to stay for a few days at the famous haunted house. You are given freedom of the house while you're here, my uncle had said, and you can carry out any investigations you like concerning our house ghost. That was how the old lady was referred to. Because I want you of all people to be convinced of the authenticity of this apparition. Somehow I was a highly respected member of the family and my uncle firmly believed that my word was accepted. The first 2 days, no sign was given of the ghostly old lady. On the third day my aunt and uncle asked me if I wanted to come on a lengthy shopping expedition because their supplies now had been exhausted and they had to travel some 20 miles to the nearest town that had a supermarket. This ritual regularly was carried out once a month. I declined the offer, as I had decided it was time for me to go for a swim in the sea. Before they left, meaningful glances were exchanged between my aunt and uncle as if they both expected to hear some news from me when they got back. As they left, my uncle turned and said, "You will be surprised at what happens while we are away." I went for my swim, but the sea was very rough and I constantly was pushed onto the beach by the waves. I gave up in the end and made my way back to the house, got washed and dressed, had a bite to eat, and sat on the most comfortable chair to watch television. After what seemed like a few minutes, I was aware of an unusual sound as if pieces of material were rubbed together. I got up from the chair and walked into the hall. I was quite taken aback with what confronted me. There, at the bottom of the stairs, was the celebrated little old lady carrying her walking stick and holding a pack of cards. For some strange reason I wasn't frightened at all by this apparition. I went up to her and quite calmly asked her, "Will you come in and join me in the sitting room?" She too showed no sign of being disturbed by my casual invitation. "I should be delighted," she replied, "and perhaps you could be persuaded to join me in a game of cards." We got on like a house on fire, but strange as it may seem, the subject of ghosts or haunting not wasn't mentioned, and we played one game of cards after the other as if it was the most natural thing in the world. I think I was dealt some terrible cards because I kept on losing, and in the end my guest was obviously getting bored by the lack of competition. A little later she complained of tiredness and left the room. When they returned, I told my uncle that the little old lady had made an appearance, but I didn't go into the card games and our little chat. He was overwhelmed by the news. It changed his life. Till his dying day he regaled all visitors with the story of the ghostly lady and then added with a broad grin, "It is not just me, you know." The story was verified by my nephew. Well, I did spend a lovely holiday there. They were both very kind to me and no harm was done. You see, it depended on the way made an appearance is interpreted. After my vigorous swim I'd sat down in front of the television and fallen asleep, and well, I have to confess I simply dreamt the whole thing. 7. Relative pronoun. The story I am about to tell you contains lots of examples of the relative pronoun. Before you read it, look through the following notes. General. 1. Relative pronouns do two jobs at once. A. Acting as subject or object of a verb. B. Joining two clauses together. 2. The most common are who, whom, which, and that. Who and whom for people and which for things. 3. Whom is not used much in conversation and refers to an object of a verb or a preposition. 4. That can often replace whom, who, and which. 5. After nouns referring to times and places, when and where can be used to mean at which or in which, and why can be used to mean for which. 6. Whose is a possessive relative word, referring to people and things. Particular. 1. Defining and non-defining relative clauses. Compare. George, who lives next door, always watches television. The couple who live next door always watch television. 2. That. A for people and things and in conversation. B after the following: all, everything, something, anything, nothing, none, little, few, much. C after superlatives. 3. In defining relative clauses, the relative pronoun is often left out if it is the object of the verb. 4. Prepositions can come before the relative pronoun or at the end of the clause, but you cannot use that or who after a preposition. 5. In a non-defining relative clause that cannot be used an object. Relative pronouns cannot be left out. 6. Sentence relative. Compare. He showed me a photo that upset me. He tore up the photo which upset me. 7. Relative and infinitive. He was unhappy unless he had someone with whom to argue. 8. Whose can refer to people or things and can be the subject of a clause, the object of a verb or the object of a preposition. 9. Instead of whose, of which can be used. 10. What? Compare. I gave her the money that she needed. I gave her what she wanted. Now read the story and see how many examples of the pronoun you can find. Relatives. I hope you know what I'm talking about. I could be talking about who, which, whose and so on, or I could be talking about aunts, uncles and cousins. That's the trouble with English. One word can have two quite different meanings. Well, in this short piece I'm going to talk about both, that is primarily aunts, uncles and so on. And with a bit of luck the other relatives should be there too. Anyhow, there are those members of the family whom you regard as part of the family, and it never occurs to you that the chap whom you call Dave is also someone to whom you could give the title uncle. You know him so well that it never occurs to you that he is in fact a relative. Then there are those that you only see on special occasions, which don't take place very often, like weddings and funerals. In the former you're usually enjoying yourself so much that you don't take much notice of them, and in the latter you hardly talk to anyone. Because it's a time when you don't talk much to anyone and a place where you don't normally go out of your way to be sociable. Then there is that special category of relatives which you hardly ever consider and whose names you only vaguely remember because they did something terrible or left the country in a hurry or who have funny ways which most of us can't accept. I had one like that, an aunt whose name was Enid. In fact, whenever I hear the name spoken or read it in a book, I always conjure up in my mind that aunt who must have been the strangest member that my family has produced. As a child I had heard stories about her that may or may not have been true. The best one I remember was when she ended up in hospital with a broken leg. Apparently she was very proud of her house, which she kept in an immaculate condition, and in this particular incident that illustrates her eccentricity, she had seen a mess on one of the rugs she kept in her sitting room. As she